August 16, 1969. As Richie Havens performed Freedom to the massive crowd at Woodstock, 21-year-old Michael Stone stood at the edge of the festival grounds, clutching a bank envelope containing trust fund documents worth $2.3 million, his inheritance from his father, legendary rock and roll pioneer Tommy Stone, whose hits had dominated the charts throughout the 1950s and early 60s. Michael had grown up in the shadow of his father's fame, raised in a Beverly Hills mansion surrounded by gold records, Grammy Awards, and the constant presence of music industry executives who treated the Stone family as royalty. But as he listened to the revolutionary music echoing across the muddy fields of Bethel, New York, Michael felt nothing but contempt for the commercial music empire that had shaped his privileged upbringing. Standing beside him was Aurora Moon, a 19-year-old flower child from San Francisco whose rejection of materialism and embrace of pure love had already begun transforming his understanding of what mattered in life. What happened next would shock the entertainment world and inspire a generation of young people to choose authentic living over inherited wealth. Michael Stone would literally set fire to his multi-million-dollar inheritance as an act of love, rebellion, and spiritual awakening that would define the rest of his life. Michael's childhood had been everything that money could buy, but love could not provide. Tommy Stone had been a revolutionary force in early rock and roll, helping to bridge the gap between country music and rhythm and blues in ways that influenced artists like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry. But success had come with a price that included constant touring, recording pressures, and personal demons that Tommy medicated with alcohol and prescription drugs. Michael's mother, former beauty queen Sandra Wells, had married Tommy at the height of his fame, but found herself trapped in a marriage that was more business partnership than romantic relationship. Their Beverly Hills estate was constantly filled with music industry parasites, hangers-on, and business associates who valued the Stone family for their connections rather than their humanity. Growing up as the son of a rock legend meant that Michael's every achievement was overshadowed by his father's reputation, while his every mistake was magnified by media attention and industry gossip. His expensive private school education was funded by royalties from songs he had heard thousands of times but never learned to love. His social circle consisted primarily of other entertainment industry children who competed for attention and status, and his future had been predetermined by trust fund managers and family lawyers who assumed he would follow in his father's footsteps or at least maintain the family's position within the music business establishment. "You're a Stone," his father would remind him during their rare conversations. "That name opens doors that other people spend their whole lives trying to get through. Don't waste the advantages I've given you." The rebellion against his predetermined path had begun during Michael's freshman year at USC, where he was supposedly studying business administration in preparation for eventually managing the Stone family's entertainment empire. But instead of focusing on marketing and finance courses, Michael found himself drawn to philosophy, literature, and political science classes that challenged his assumptions about capitalism, materialism, and the American dream his family had achieved. His professors introduced him to writers like Henry David Thoreau, Allen Ginsberg, and Timothy Leary, whose ideas about voluntary simplicity, spiritual awakening, and rejection of conventional success resonated with his growing disillusionment with inherited privilege. The first crack in Michael's relationship with his family came when he began questioning the moral implications of his father's music industry connections, particularly the payola scandals and racist business practices that had characterized the early rock and roll era. Tommy Stone's success had been built partially on covering songs written by African-American artists who received little credit or compensation, while his record label had systematically exploited musicians who lacked the business knowledge to protect their interests. "Dad, how can you be proud of success that was built on stealing from people who had less power than you?" Michael had asked during one particularly heated family dinner. "How is that different from any other form of theft?" Tommy's response had been defensive anger rather than honest examination of his business practices. The transformation that would change everything began when Michael attended a campus protest against the Vietnam War in the spring of 1969. Among the student activists, he met Aurora Moon, whose passion for social justice and spiritual awakening challenged everything Michael had been taught about success and happiness. Aurora came from a working-class family in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, where she had witnessed firsthand the birth of the hippie movement and its emphasis on love, peace, and rejection of materialistic values. Her natural beauty was enhanced by her complete lack of concern for conventional standards of appearance, Her intelligence was focused on understanding rather than achievement, and her compassion extended to all living beings in ways that made Michael's privileged lifestyle seem spiritually impoverished. The relationship that developed between Michael and Aurora was unlike anything he had experienced during his sheltered upbringing among entertainment industry socialites. Aurora was completely unimpressed by his family's wealth and fame, viewing inherited privilege as a spiritual burden rather than a blessing to be envied. She challenged him to examine whether his comfortable lifestyle was built on exploitation of others, whether his future plans served authentic values or merely perpetuated systems of inequality, and whether he was capable of choosing love over security when faced with real decisions about how to live. "Money is just energy," she explained during one of their long philosophical conversations. "The question is whether that energy serves life or serves death, whether it creates beauty or destroys it, whether it brings people together or drives them apart." Michael's growing involvement with Aurora's activist community created increasing tension with his family, who viewed his political awakening as temporary rebellion that would pass once he matured and accepted his responsibilities to the Stone legacy. His father was particularly concerned about potential damage to the family's reputation within the conservative music industry establishment, while his mother worried that Michael was being manipulated by radicals who wanted to exploit his wealth for their political causes. "You're embarrassing the family name," Tommy told his son during a confrontation that would prove to be their last civil conversation. "You're throwing away everything I worked to build, everything I sacrificed to give you. These hippie kids don't care about you. They just want access to your money and connections." The decision to attend Woodstock, despite his family's explicit prohibition, represented Michael's definitive break from their control and expectations. Aurora had been planning to attend the festival with a group of San Francisco friends who were traveling cross-country in a painted school bus, following the music and spreading the message of peace and love. When she invited Michael to join them, he realized that this was his opportunity to choose between the safe predictability of his inherited path and the uncertain adventure of authentic living. "If you come with us," Aurora told him, "you have to come as yourself, not as Tommy Stone's son. You have to be willing to let go of everything that makes you feel safe and secure and trust that love is enough to sustain you." The journey to Woodstock in the converted school bus was Michael's first experience of communal living and voluntary poverty. Instead of the luxury transportation he was accustomed to, he found himself sharing cramped quarters with a dozen other young people who owned almost nothing, but seemed infinitely happier than anyone in his privileged social circle. They shared food, stories, dreams, and music in ways that created genuine community rather than the competitive social dynamics Michael had known throughout his life. "I realized that I had never experienced real friendship before," he later wrote in his journal. "I had only known relationships based on what people could do for each other rather than who they actually were." Before you continue this incredible journey of love, sacrifice, and spiritual awakening with us, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories that challenge everything we think we know about wealth, success, and what it means to live authentically. The arrival at Woodstock confirmed everything Aurora had tried to teach Michael about the difference between authentic culture and commercial entertainment. The festival represented a gathering of people who were creating new forms of community based on sharing rather than competition, love rather than fear, cooperation rather than domination. The music was revolutionary, not just in its sound, but in its message, challenging audiences to question authority, reject materialism, and embrace spiritual transformation. As Michael walked through the crowd with Aurora, he felt like he was witnessing the birth of a new world that made his old life seem artificial and meaningless by comparison. The moment that would change everything came during Country Joe McDonald's performance, when the singer invited audience members to burn symbols of the old world they were rejecting in favor of a new consciousness based on peace and love. Michael watched as young people stepped forward to burn draft cards, family photographs, college diplomas, and other representations of conventional success and social expectations. When Aurora looked at him, with eyes full of love and challenge, he knew that his moment of truth had arrived. The trust fund documents in his pocket represented everything his family valued and everything Aurora's community rejected. The choice was clear. He could preserve his financial security and lose his soul, or he could choose love and trust that the universe would provide whatever he truly needed. The decision to burn his inheritance documents was both impulsive and inevitable. representing the culmination of months of growing awareness about the spiritual costs of unearned privilege. As Michael pulled the bank envelope from his pocket and held it over someone's lighter, he felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. The flames that consumed the papers also burned away his safety net, his predetermined future, and his identity as Tommy Stone's heir. "I choose love," he announced to Aurora and their friends as the documents turned to ash. "I choose you. I choose this community. I choose to discover who I am when I'm not defined by money I didn't earn." The crowd around them erupted in celebration, welcoming Michael into the brotherhood of people who had chosen authentic living over inherited advantage. The immediate aftermath of burning his inheritance was a mixture of euphoria and terror, as Michael realized he had just destroyed his financial security forever. The trust fund documents had represented not just money, but his entire identity within the entertainment industry establishment, his safety net against an uncertain future, and his family's expectations for his role in perpetuating their legacy. But as Aurora embraced him with tears of joy, and their friends celebrated his act of liberation, Michael felt a lightness and authenticity he had never experienced during his privileged upbringing. "You're free now," Aurora whispered in his ear as they held each other, while Jimi Hendrix's guitar wailed in the distance. "You're free to discover who you really are when you're not carrying the weight of inherited expectations." The legal and family consequences of Michael's action began to manifest even before Woodstock ended, as news of the heir to the Stone fortune burning his inheritance spread through music industry networks and eventually reached his parents in Beverly Hills. Tommy Stone's rage was volcanic when he received the phone call from a music journalist who had witnessed his son's dramatic gesture and wanted a comment for his story. "He's lost his mind," Tommy shouted into the phone. "He's been brainwashed by communist hippies who convinced him to destroy his future for their propaganda purposes. I'm going to have him declared mentally incompetent and reverse whatever legal damage he's done to the family estate." But the trust fund documents Michael had burned were originals, and their destruction meant that his inheritance had been legally voided in a way that even the best lawyers couldn't reverse. The return to Los Angeles after Woodstock forced Michael to confront the practical implications of his choice while dealing with his family's fury and the media attention that surrounded his story. His parents had changed the locks on their Beverly Hills mansion and frozen his access to credit cards and bank accounts that had previously provided unlimited spending power. His former friends from the entertainment industry social scene treated him like he had contracted a contagious disease, while reporters and television crews camped outside his friends' houses seeking interviews about the rock star's son who had gone hippie in the most dramatic way possible. "I realized that I had never had real friends," Michael reflected during this difficult period. "I had only had people who enjoyed associating with my family's wealth and status." Aurora's support during this transition period was unwavering, but not enabling. She helped Michael find temporary housing and minimum wage work while refusing to let him become dependent on her financially or emotionally. Her approach to their relationship reflected the hippie movement's emphasis on individual growth within supportive community rather than codependent romantic partnerships. "I can't rescue you from the consequences of your choice," she told him with loving firmness. "But I can love you while you learn how to rescue yourself. You have to discover your own strength and capabilities without relying on inherited advantages or your girlfriend's charity." Her wisdom helped Michael understand that true independence meant taking responsibility for his own survival rather than expecting others to provide security. The work that Michael found at a health food store in West Hollywood was his first experience of earning money through his own labor rather than receiving it through family connections. The job paid minimum wage and required him to stock shelves, work the register, and clean the store, tasks that would have been unthinkable during his privileged upbringing, but which now felt like honest expressions of his commitment to authentic living. His co-workers were a mix of hippies, college dropouts, and working-class people who appreciated his willingness to do unglamorous work without complaint, though they were initially suspicious of his motives for choosing poverty when he could have remained wealthy. The education that Michael received through his immersion in counterculture community was more valuable than anything he had learned during his expensive private school and university education. Through Aurora's friends and the wider network of hippie activists, artists, and spiritual seekers, he discovered alternative approaches to economics, relationships, creativity, and social organization that challenged every assumption his upbringing had instilled. He learned about cooperative businesses, communal living, organic agriculture, alternative medicine, and Eastern spiritual practices that offered practical alternatives to the competitive individualism and materialistic values that dominated mainstream American culture. The relationship between Michael and Aurora deepened as both individuals grew through their shared commitment to countercultural values and their mutual support during Michael's difficult transition from inherited privilege to self-determined poverty. Their romantic connection was passionate but not possessive, intimate but not exclusive, committed but not conventional in its expression. They lived together in a small apartment they shared with 3 other activists, participated in group relationships that emphasized emotional honesty over sexual jealousy, and approached their partnership as one element of their larger dedication to revolutionary social change rather than as an escape from political engagement. The creative awakening that emerged from Michael's rejection of inherited wealth took the form of songwriting and musical performance that drew on his family background while serving completely different values than his father's commercial career. Working with Aurora and other musicians in their community, Michael began developing a style that combined folk traditions with rock instrumentation to create music that supported political activism and spiritual awakening rather than entertainment industry profit. His songs address themes of voluntary poverty, environmental consciousness, anti-war sentiment, and the spiritual costs of materialism, directly contradicting the messages that had characterized his father's music and the broader entertainment industry. The reconciliation attempt that Tommy Stone made 6 months after Woodstock was both genuine and manipulative, representing the aging rock star's love for his son, combined with his inability to understand or accept Michael's choices. Tommy flew to Los Angeles and tracked down Michael at the health food store, offering to restore his inheritance and welcome him back into the family if he would abandon his hippie lifestyle and return to college. "I know you think you're standing up for your principles," Tommy told his son during their emotional confrontation, "but you're just throwing away your life for people who will abandon you the moment things get difficult. Come home, finish your education, and help me turn our business toward more socially conscious directions. You can change the system from within instead of just dropping out." Michael's response to his father's offer revealed how completely his values and priorities had been transformed through his experiences in the counterculture community. "Dad, I appreciate that you love me and want me to be secure," he replied calmly. "But the security you're offering comes at the cost of everything I've learned to value about authentic living. I can't change your system from within because the system itself is the problem. It's based on exploitation, competition, and the accumulation of wealth that ultimately serves no one's real needs. I'd rather be poor and honest than rich, and complicit in perpetuating injustice." Tommy's inability to understand his son's perspective led to their final estrangement, with the rock legend disowning his heir and publicly denouncing his choices as evidence of mental illness and communist influence. The year that followed Michael's break with his family was marked by both external challenges and internal growth as he learned to navigate adult life without the safety net of inherited privilege. He experienced periods of genuine poverty when work was scarce, faced arrest during anti-war protests, struggled with depression when his idealism collided with harsh realities, and questioned whether his sacrifice had been worth the costs it demanded. But he also discovered capabilities and strengths he had never needed to develop during his protected upbringing, formed relationships based on genuine affection rather than social advantage, and found satisfaction in work that aligned with his values even when it provided minimal financial compensation. The community that sustained Michael during this difficult period was composed of other young people who had made similar choices to reject conventional paths in favor of alternative lifestyles. Some were children of wealthy families who had walked away from inheritance and privilege. Others were working-class activists who had chosen political engagement over economic advancement, and still others were artists and spiritual seekers who prioritized creativity and consciousness over material success. Together, they created networks of mutual support that demonstrated practical alternatives to nuclear family structures and competitive individualism, sharing resources, knowledge, and emotional care in ways that made voluntary poverty sustainable and even fulfilling. The musical success that eventually emerged from Michael's authentic artistic expression was completely different from the commercial achievement his father had always expected him to pursue. Working with Aurora and other activist musicians, Michael developed a following within the counterculture community that appreciated his songs for their political message and spiritual insight rather than their entertainment value. Their concerts were typically held in parks, community centers, and protest gatherings where admission was free and the purpose was consciousness-raising rather than profit generation. "We're not performing for audiences," Michael explained to an underground newspaper reporter. "We're creating music with communities of people who share our values and want to use art as a tool for social transformation." The third year after Woodstock marked Michael's complete transformation from privileged heir to committed revolutionary, as his rejection of inherited wealth evolved into a sophisticated understanding of alternative economics and sustainable community building. He had moved beyond the reactive phase of simply rejecting his family's values to the creative phase of developing practical alternatives that could inspire other young people to choose authentic living over conventional success. His relationship with Aurora had matured into a partnership that combined deep personal intimacy with shared political commitment, while his musical career had found its authentic voice in service of the growing movement for social and environmental justice. The commune that Michael and Aurora helped establish in Northern California became a model for intentional communities seeking to demonstrate that voluntary simplicity and cooperative economics could provide higher quality of life than competitive individualism and material accumulation. Using skills learned through their years of urban activism, they created a settlement that combined organic farming, renewable energy, communal childcare, and consensus decision-making in ways that attracted visitors from around the world who wanted to learn practical alternatives to mainstream American lifestyle. Michael's organizational abilities, developed through his expensive education, but now applied to revolutionary purposes, helped the community navigate legal challenges and economic pressures while maintaining their commitment to non-hierarchical social structures. The musical legacy that emerged from Michael's authentic artistic development proved more influential and enduring than anything his father had achieved during his commercial peak, though in ways that couldn't be measured through traditional industry metrics. The songs Michael wrote about voluntary poverty, environmental consciousness, and spiritual awakening became anthems for the Back to the Land movement, soundtrack for countless protest gatherings, and inspiration for other musicians who were seeking alternatives to entertainment industry exploitation. His integration of political message with spiritual insight helped define what became known as conscious music, a genre that prioritized healing and transformation over entertainment and profit. The reconciliation with his family that occurred 5 years after his inheritance burning was initiated by his mother, Sandra, who had begun questioning her own choices and values as she witnessed her son's obvious happiness and fulfillment in his alternative lifestyle. Tommy Stone's declining health and growing isolation had made Sandra more receptive to Michael's perspective on the spiritual costs of material success, while his demonstrated commitment to his principles over time had proven that his choices represented genuine conviction rather than temporary rebellion. "I'm beginning to understand that you found something I lost years ago," Sandra told Michael during their first conversation in 3 years. "You found a way to live according to your values instead of just accumulating things that are supposed to make you happy but never do." The meeting between Michael and his dying father was emotionally complex, but ultimately healing for both men, as Tommy Stone finally recognized that his son had achieved a form of success that was more meaningful than anything the entertainment industry could provide. Tommy's legacy of hit songs and industry influence seemed hollow compared to Michael's creation of sustainable community and authentic relationships based on love rather than exploitation. "I gave you money," Tommy said during their final conversation. "But you found wealth. I gave you my name, but you found your identity. I gave you privilege, but you found freedom. Maybe you were right to burn that inheritance. Maybe it would have burned you from the inside if you had kept it." The influence of Michael's story on the broader counterculture movement was significant, but often unrecognized by historians who focused on more visible political activism rather than the quieter revolution of lifestyle experimentation and voluntary simplicity. His example inspired thousands of young people from wealthy families to question inherited privilege and consider alternative approaches to success and fulfillment, while his practical demonstration that voluntary poverty could be sustainable and satisfying challenged mainstream assumptions about the relationship between money and happiness. The communes and intentional communities that were influenced by Michael and Aurora's model spread across the country, creating a network of alternative societies that continued experimenting with conscious living long after the initial hippie movement had faded from public attention. The educational programs that Michael and Aurora developed for teaching sustainable living and community building became nationally recognized models for experiential learning about environmental stewardship, conflict resolution, and cooperative economics. Their workshops on voluntary simplicity and authentic wealth attracted participants from universities, religious communities, and other intentional communities who wanted to learn practical alternatives to competitive individualism and material accumulation. Michael's teaching emphasized that true security came from community relationships and personal capabilities rather than financial assets, and that real wealth consisted of time, health, meaningful work, and loving relationships rather than money and possessions. The next generation that grew up in the community Michael and Aurora created represented a living experiment in raising children according to alternative values and social structures. Their daughter Rainbow, born in 1973, was raised communally by the entire community rather than exclusively by her biological parents, educated through hands-on experience with sustainable living rather than abstract classroom instruction, and encouraged to develop her unique gifts in service of collective well-being rather than individual achievement. We're trying to raise children who understand that happiness comes from contributing to something larger than themselves, Aurora explained to visitors who were documenting alternative approaches to child rearing. The economic model that evolved from their community's experiments with voluntary simplicity and cooperative resource sharing became influential in the development of what later became known as the gift economy and sustainable living movements. Instead of accumulating individual wealth, community members contributed their skills and labor to collective projects while receiving what they needed for comfortable living through community support systems. Michael's background in business administration, acquired during his university studies, proved valuable in developing these alternative economic structures, though applied to completely different purposes than his family had intended. The musical evolution that continued throughout Michael's later years demonstrated that artistic authenticity and commercial irrelevance could coexist beautifully when creativity served spiritual and political purposes rather than entertainment industry profits. His songs became increasingly sophisticated in their integration of environmental themes, spiritual insights, and practical guidance for sustainable living, while his performance style emphasized participation and community building rather than passive consumption of professional entertainment. The music he created with Aurora and other community members influenced the development of what became known as earth music, a genre that connected artistic expression with environmental consciousness and social responsibility. The recognition that eventually came to Michael's work included invitations to speak at universities, conferences, and political gatherings about alternative approaches to success, wealth, and community organization. His story of choosing love over money, authenticity over security, and community over individual advancement resonated with audiences who were struggling with similar questions about career choices, family expectations, and the relationship between personal fulfillment and social responsibility. "The inheritance I burned was just paper," he would tell audiences. "The real inheritance was the freedom to choose my own values and create my own definition of success." The legacy of Michael Stone was ultimately not his rejection of inherited wealth, but his demonstration that young people could create meaningful lives based on authentic values rather than social expectations, that voluntary simplicity could provide greater satisfaction than material accumulation, and that love truly could sustain individuals and communities through the challenges of choosing alternative lifestyles. His relationship with Aurora had proven that romance based on shared values and mutual growth could endure far longer than relationships based on convenience or social advantage. Their community had shown that cooperative economics could work on a practical level while providing higher quality of life than competitive individualism. The rock star's son, who had burned his inheritance at Woodstock for his hippie girlfriend, had discovered that the greatest wealth was not what he could inherit, but what he could create through his own choices and commitments. His story became part of the larger narrative of the counterculture movement's search for alternative ways of organizing society and alternative definitions of human fulfillment. The millions of dollars that went up in smoke that day at Woodstock had been transformed into something far more valuable: a life lived according to authentic principles, a relationship based on genuine love, and a community that demonstrated practical alternatives to the spiritual poverty that often accompanied material wealth. In the end, Michael had learned that true inheritance was not what previous generations left behind, but what each generation chose to create for the future.